Hello and welcome to busyworksbeats.com. Today we're going to go over writing chord progressions and how to understand what we call scale degrees. So when I'm talking about scale degrees, you're going to hear terms like the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, adding that ninth, the seventh, the third, okay, adding that ending to that number. Again, separate from chord codes when we're talking about scale degrees. And the difference is that in scale degrees, you say third instead of three. You say seventh instead of seven. You say the ninth instead of nine. So we're not talking about numbers. We're talking about a relative system when we talk about scale degrees. And let's break down the scale degree system. So let's right click. Let's open up our piano roll. And let's draw out the A natural minor scale, which is all the white notes starting from A. Okay, so this is our scale reference, the A natural minor scale. Now what we can do from the scale is actually build chords for each note within the scale. And this is what scale degrees are all about. So let's say you wanted to build a chord for the note A. We start at A, and all we have to do is skip every other note within the scale. So skip B, go to C, skip D, go to E. So that's the first chord, A, C, E. And that's the A minor chord. Now every chord in a scale is not minor, and it's not always major, and it's not always one thing or the other thing. You could have major, minor, augmented, diminished. You can have many different chords inside of a scale. So this system is based on using these notes only to build chords. And we're going to get into expanding chords to where you don't have to necessarily use these notes only to build chords, but it's an easier, not an easier, but it's an easy way to get started programming your own chords if you're not really heavily using chord codes and the different systems altogether. So let's build a chord for each note within the scale. So that's the chord for A. Now the chord for B is, again, skipping every other note within the scale. B, skip C, go to D, skip E, go to F. This is called the B diminished chord. Why is it called the diminished chord? Because it has a chord code tied to it. So it's not, traditional music theory tells you to memorize different chords for different scales. We tell you to identify a chord based on its numerical value so that you can understand what the chord is at its core. The reason we call this diminished is because the chord code 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a diminished chord code 0, 3, 6. The first chord is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 0, 3, 7, as you know in the chord code book, is minor. Okay, so that's how you can identify a chord without even knowing the scale. Okay, and memorizing things. You just need to know your chord codes. Let's build out the chord for C. It's going to be C, E, G. Again, the same technique. You skip every other note within the scale. So that's what we're doing here. Now let me duplicate the scale so we can see a higher octave of it. Now the chord, so this would be the C major. So we went from A minor to B diminished to C major. Three completely different chords, all in a minor scale. So it just shows how the chords tied to the letters in a scale or the notes in a scale are not necessarily one or the other. It's not either major or either minor. Okay, you can have different chords inside your scale. So these are all called scale degrees. So let's quickly go over each scale degree. When you map out a scale with 7 letters, A through G, you give each a scale degree. Okay, so in every scale, mostly, you're going to have, you're going to name them according to, let me make this easier. Let me simplify it for you. The way you name the letters in the scale is based on occupying every letter from A to G. That may not make sense, but when we talk about it in context. So let's say I pull this down to A sharp, just for an example. So the scale is not A sharp, C, D, E, F, G. It's really A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G. We call this B flat because we have to cover every letter from A through G. So that's an easier way to think about it. You have to cover each letter from A to G in what's called a diatonic type of scale system. Okay. So just keep that in mind. So when you're having trouble naming things, for example, if I move these around like this, Okay, so it becomes, so the question is, how do you name these? It goes A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G. So that was an easy example because we don't have notes similar. Let's pull this note to A sharp and let's pull this to D sharp. So now the question is, how do you name this? So you start at A and then you have to go to B. So we're done naming the A note, okay? Now when I'm talking about sharps and flats, we're gonna include a different video from the original course going over sharps and flats and the different, symbols that you're gonna see. But this is the secondary video here. So we have A and we're moving on now to B. So this is B flat and we call it flat because it goes down one step from B. To sharpen B would actually to go up one step from B, which would make it C. So going up is called sharpening, going down is called flattening a note. So if you go down, it's called flattening the note. And that's what we name it, A, B flat, because we took the B and it's flattened. C, D, and now we already named D. We have to use this name here as E. So this has to be some version of E. So this is called E flat. And then you have this technically, this probably isn't even a scale, but this would be F sharp. You typically wouldn't have F sharp, so that wouldn't be the case. This would be F, but I'm exaggerating. So when you're writing out scales, you either have flats or you have sharps. You wouldn't have flats and sharps. Okay, so that's why that's not a realistic example. So you hopefully get the idea. You cover every letter from A to G. Okay, so now back to writing out the chords for each scale degree. So before we write out the chords, let's actually talk about the scale degrees. So this is what's called the root note or the tonic. It's the starting point for the scale. So you have generally 7 notes, again, in a diatonic scale, 7 notes from A to G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's why we name things the 7th, because it's the 7th note in the scale. We call the C the 3rd because it's the 3rd note within the scale. And it's all based on that root note. So you have to understand what the root note of a scale is. And that's why I say traditional music theory is just overcomplicating things. Now this does help you in songwriting and different nomenclatures and talking about music theory. But it makes you memorize 3 different things before you can even build a chord. And that's what chord codes are about, getting straight to the chord without even needing to understand this. So we have A here. This is called the first or the tonic. You have B, which is the 2nd. C, the 3rd scale degree. D, the 4th. We're just counting upward. E is the 5th. F is the 6th. And G is the 7th. Now some other names that you're going to hear, the tonic is the root note of the scale. 2nd, 3rd, 4th. The 5th is also called the dominant. Okay, it's just another name for it. It's based on the chord. It's called dominant because of a specific chord progression technique, which we'll get into in a second. This is called the subdominant, sub meaning below the dominant. So that's the number 4. Then you have the dominant, the number 5, 6, and then you have the 7th. Okay, or also called the leading tone. So this is why we call our system when you're building chords the pseudo leading tone, because there's already a term in music theory called the leading tone, which really just refers to the note right before you lead back to the tonic. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about pseudo leading tones building chords. So separating our 2 systems from traditional music theory. So now that you understand the scale and the different nomenclatures that you're going to see, let's continue building out those chords. So starting from D, again, this would be D, F, A. The system here is, again, skipping every other note within the scale. I don't want to have to keep repeating myself, but that's what we're doing. Skipping every other note within the scale. So it's D, F, A. Then you have E, G, B, which is E minor. Whoops. And then you have F major, F, A, C. And then you have G major, G, B, D. And you have A minor again, A, C, E. So let's go through the different chord types that you can achieve in a minor scale. So again, the point of me doing this is to show you that even though it's called a minor scale, each chord associated to each note within the scale is not necessarily minor. So we have A minor, B diminished. Again, why are we naming it B diminished? Because of the chord code. Okay, so if you want to name a chord, you need to know what makes the chord a chord. Okay, and that's the chord code. This is C major based on the chord code 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a major chord code, so that makes this C major. Root note chord code. C, chord code's major, so we call it C major. D, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This makes it a minor, so we call it D minor. Okay. E, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is E3, E3, 7. 0, 3, 7. The root note is E, so we call it E minor. It's all based on chord codes. F major. Why? Because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 0, 4, 7 is the major chord code. So we call it root note chord code. We call it F major. And we have G major. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we have A minor again. Okay, so that displays how you can build chords using a scale. So each note within a scale has a chord associated with it. So not only do you have the notes within the scale to use, you can also build chords using that note as a root note for some chord. And that's how you start to build out chord progressions. You use these as different options to get you through a chord progression. So let's use the scale to build out a chord progression. Okay, let's start at A, C, E. And now we want to go to the note E. We want to make it E minor. So let's go, E is the root note. And the question is, how do you build out the chord? You skip every other note within the scale. So you go E, skip F, go to G, skip A, go to B, E, G, B. There you have two chords you can use. Now I'm going to transpose this down so it gives it more of a dark feel. And let's say we want to work backwards. So let's say we have a tone in mind, but we don't know the chord. So I want to hear A. So we start at A as the top note. We're assuming it's the top note of this chord, skipping every other note, going downward instead of upward. So it's A, F, D, which is D minor, D, F, A. And then I want to hear this note E. Again, assuming it's the top note, skipping every other note. That brings me to A minor. Okay, so that's how you build chord progressions. You use the chords associated with each note within a scale. Now we go over the technologies because it's a lot more involved in writing chord progressions. There's change-ups, expansions of chords. There's chord codes. Sometimes you mix up the chords. Sometimes you go outside the scale. We go over all that in chord magic. Okay, that's the expansion to music theory in a day, going over chords and how to generate mood. Now I mentioned going over the terms dominant and tonic. So tonic is, think of it as home. You know, when we're writing songs, we start at home, we go on a journey, we have a rough time on the journey, we come back home. That's the songwriting in a nutshell. So we call things the tonic and dominant because our ear feels heavily resolved. It feels eased when we go from the dominant to the tonic. And when we're talking about dominant and tonic, we're talking about the tones in our scale. So A is our tonic, the number 1. And remember, the dominant is the number 5. So we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that makes E our dominant. But to use this in a chord progression, that means we have to use E before we use A. I mean, we have to build out the chord for E. So let's go A, and then go E. And remember, to build out the chords, you just skip every other note within the scale. So starting at E, skip F, go to G, skip A, go to B. And then we're going to go back to A minor again. And our ear is going to feel like that's what we wanted to hear the whole time. And that's the dominant to tonic motion. It's why it's called dominant, okay? Because it feels heavily resolved when you go back to the tonic. The ultimate resolution, typically used at the end of a song to make it feel complete. Okay, that's why it's called dominant, because it's the dominant choice for a chord to go back to that tonic. It's just how we're built in society. We expect different notes, and that's just how we're built as human beings. We have expectations. And when those expectations are achieved, we feel resolved. And that's just built into us to hear that dominant to tonic movement. So that is how you build chord progressions. Let's just build, well, we went over chord progressions, but you can expand it into your own flavor. Again, you can build chords from the scale. We just showed you how. So Thank you for watching today. It's busyworksbeats.com. If you want to learn more about music theory, specifically understanding more about chords and understanding more about melody, you want to go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory. There you can find Chord Magic, where we go over how to create mood with chords. And in Melody Magic, we go over the secrets behind the top melodies. So thank you for watching today at busyworksbeats.com.